Welcome to the Industrial Cybersecurity Insider. In each episode, we dive into the world of industrial cybersecurity. Join us as we cover the latest trends, innovations, and practical insights as we talk with leaders and practitioners across the industry. Gear up and let's get into this week's episode.
Ownership, that's so core to the problem space as it exists in all of it, really. It all comes down to ownership in both understanding who is the owner, but also making sure that they're at the table when decisions are being made. So you can't have a different group making a whole bunch of different decisions. So let's throw an example out there. Say have the IT security team. They suddenly have a mandate to put cybersecurity in the OT environment, in this new production environment. So they make all the decisions themselves. They don't consult, get any input from. They blow into the manufacturing floor and say, here we go, we've got to go and deploy all of this stuff, just to be rebuffed and told, take a hike because you didn't consider anything that we need to manage here. Right. Priorities were different. The objectives were different. Seen it happen a lot of times.
Right. Process and production and safety. Safety's job one, right, on the plant floor. So I think sometimes IT kind of miss that, and their practices and the technologies, quite frankly, that they use are very disruptive in an industrial environment.
Yeah, that's absolutely the case. And a while back, as I was thinking about this problem, a good analogy struck me on how to describe, in a lot of cases, and not being done in a malicious way. It's kind of just how we go about approaching problems. So if we consider IT security, so it has its approach to doing IT security things, right? So inside the data center, inside the on-premise corporate environment. Kind of know how to do that. Yeah, there's changes and developments. For the most part, there's a pretty well-defined approach to take. Then along came cloud computing. And now the IT security teams were responsible for securing these cloud environments. So they were the Wild West initially, and then bad things started happening, and now requirements existed that they had to be secured. So the IT security teams were able, for the most part, to take their knowledge and their approach, their experience, and apply it to the new domain of cloud security. And how do we approach this to provide the security for it? Of course, there were changes that have been required and new technologies have come out, all of that kind of jazz. But for the most part, that skill set, that experience could transfer. So now enter the space is OT security. And the same thing's trying to be done, where it's, okay, well, this worked for IT, it also works for cloud. As I now approach this new security problem, I'm going to take the same mindset, the things that I know, the approaches that I know, and apply them into this new domain. The issue is that without understanding the restrictions and limitations, you don't realize until it's too late, or hopefully someone stops you, that, as you mentioned, what you do is going to be very disruptive. You can't take a stop things and then fix it later if it goes wrong. You have to adapt any approach that you take to identify the priorities and respect the priorities of that operation. It's a mindset change that's needed for a lot of teams to say, okay, I have this wide domain knowledge, but it may not be directly applicable. And I should wait. I should work closely with these other teams. Collaboration is so important to understand why and then go forward.
Yeah, I like the cloud analogy because even the client that was wanting to leverage the cloud still had to rely on multiple external resources to help them, right? The cloud's vendor, the security that vendor is using, and or third parties, and the technologies that you're deploying and buying, whether it be Palo Alto or Cisco or Juniper or CrowdStrike or what have you. It was a culmination organizations to help with that, right? It wasn't just the client pick company A who wants to leverage the cloud and say, I got this all figured out, I'm going to start leveraging cloud. They had to rely on those third parties to help them, right? And I see that as a little bit of a gap on the OT side, right? Because I hate the term here of whose truth is actually real, right? In this discussion, right? And how do you make that happen with OEMs, SIs, plant operations teams, engineering teams, IT, InfoSec network, right? Plant management, risk. all these different groups that you got to bring to the table to tackle this area that we're concerned about, which is that industrial control system environment. So the cloud, that's a good one, right? So whatever playbook you had to use then to bring all these people to the table, you have to do the same thing again if you really want to get after your plant floor cybersecurity posture and strategy.
Absolutely. This is definitely even more broadly than this for OT security in general. I think by identifying that, hold on, maybe we have a playbook that we can reference here, how we went to cloud, how can we use that? But even just OT security versus IT, I think we can learn as an industry, we can learn from the mistakes. Boy, were there some missteps in IT security, some things that didn't go well, some approaches that security organizations took that just really rubbed everyone the wrong way. Essentially, and I hate when I read it, when I see it, that it's always the user's fault, or the user's always wrong, or the user knows nothing, or it's a user error. Well, it's because you never told them what to do in the first place, and then you yelled at them when they didn't do it.
Yeah, well, we see that a lot. And it's the finger pointing game, right, between IT and OT. And OT's has got a little bad taste in their mouth because they've had disruption, they've had shutdowns, not really sure what happened. IT's claiming they didn't do anything, it wasn't on their end, nobody knows what really happened, or they do find out what happened, and it was IT scanning the network at the wrong time, trying to do their due diligence, but not realizing that they were going to be very disruptive in their activities. So, because I will tell you, as a long-term manufacturing guy and working for a group the size of Design Group, the Barry Wehmiller teams, we got hundreds of clients, do tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of business every year. And I will tell you right now, nobody calls us up and says, hey, we need to tell this project that you're working with us on, we need to sit down and have an OT cybersecurity strategy planning session. Mm-hmm. Think about that for a second, right? Never once as a CISO or a CIO or the engineering team came to us on a $25 million project, which we're doing for them, or even a new plant build out, a $200 million plant build out. And nobody's sitting down to us and going, hey, we need to do all these machines, all these systems, all these networks that you're bringing into this manufacturing environment. It sat down and said, we need to talk about our cybersecurity plan. A lot of times we're not getting phone calls from the CIO or the CISO or the IT leadership having us come in to talk about the project that we're getting ready to do, whether it's brownfield, greenfield, lifecycle replacement, recontrol, integrations, where they're really digging into what it is that we're bringing to the table for them. Are you seeing that from an Armis perspective? I know you guys you work with IT quite a bit, but what does that move towards OT look like?
It is very difficult, right? So, and then that's why I come in the conversation, because having that operational experience from an OT perspective, I can actually understand the positions from an OT perspective. And also, having the opportunity to be a system administrator, network engineer, then I can also see the perspective from the IT. And I try to kind of join forces and see the positive between the two and the convergence between the two. But the one thing that we always need to understand is IT networks and OT networks are completely different, and they're designed for different reasons. Like the IT networks are typically designed to improve productivity and provide more tools to the users to be more productive, and to, the more tools, the better in a way. And of course, with great power comes great responsibility, and then you have to create or put more security in place and add agents and to monitor the traffic and to monitor the information that's going in and out of the devices. So it becomes very process intensive when it comes to understanding the IT networks. The OT networks, on the other hand, is completely the opposite. The OT networks are defined for a purpose, and it's the purpose of communicating ICS devices and perhaps some other IoT devices like cameras and TVs and handhelds, but dedicated and purely dedicated to the process, the OT process. When you talk to a plant manager, there's only two things in his head: keeping production, improving production, but also safety of the people. So then when you actually think about a control systems, especially when it's actually critical systems, if you ever lose visibility of an OT process, like operators, the displays of the operators go frozen, or there is no communication to the controllers, that's actually reason enough to do a shutdown. And if you're actually going to install agents from an IT perspective to protect those devices, then there's a risk. And there's a risk that increases very rapidly. On top of that, you also have to consider that these devices are maintained by very strict SLA when it comes from the vendor perspective. So what that means is that if you have a system that is driven by Yokogawa or Honeywell, they will actually have very strict requirements of how do you configure the Active Directory, what EDR you can actually install in the machine, what endpoints and so forth. So there is a lot of really requirements that it needs to be met. And if you let IT to start installing, then you could actually potentially break that SLA and then lose the support that you need to maintain operations. So it seems like an impossible task to join them together. And in fact, when going back to my role in the energy company, so we were able to kind of work together in one effort, and that was actually to build a new operator controls area, right? So a data center with the control room. And the way we did it is like we have the SMEs from the control system, and we have the SME from the IT system, and then we actually create common design. But the common design, it wasn't merging the two networks together. It was still we have our subnet, if you want to see it that way, of the OT, and which are actually managed by us, and then the IT network. And then we have, of course, the DMZ, and then two firewalls where one firewall was controlled by the OT team, and the other firewall the OT team. But the good thing is that we created a design where all the drawings were the same. OT and OT have the same drawings. All the procurement was the same. So we actually used exactly the same hardware across the board so that everything was actually a lot cheaper. And everything that we designed was taking that into account. Hey, we know what devices we need to connect across from the OT to the IT. And then we designed the policies in the firewalls with the whitelisting procedures to make sure that all the communications that we needed from Pi, for instance, to the SCADA servers and so forth were in place in both firewalls and so forth. So that worked really well because it was very efficient, because we didn't have to actually ask for permission because the design was from the ground up together. So there is ways that we can actually work together for sure.
Yeah, that's a good point. I call them the aftermarket parts. When you have IT, for example, as an SI, we don't implement EDR and design EDR into the control systems that we're providing to the client, right? Because to your point, they can be disruptive, right?
Yes.
Yeah, we'll find in a lot of cases after we've done that work that IT will come in at a later date and install a CrowdStrike or a SentinelOne in the environment, and all of a sudden you start having odd problems within your manufacturing environment you can't quite put your finger on, which is really good when you have tools like Armis in place, because it's going to show you that disruption. Right?
Exactly. Yes.
That's a good point, right? And for the IT people out there listening to this, think about that before you start just throwing a CrowdStrike or a SentinelOne or some EDR package into that OT environment around those HMIs, because it can be disruptive if it's thwarting communication, scanning at the wrong time, doing its AV, and all of a sudden that HMI freezes for 30 seconds, and all of a sudden my process is at risk.
I think the first question they need to ask themselves, and it's actually something that I will actually communicate to the IT people, is it qualified by the vendor, the manufacturer of the system that you're want to install it? And if you can't answer the question, you need to investigate which vendor is being used, and then whether or not the vendor supports the EDR. That's actually a very important part that IT people tend to ignore.
Right. Well, let's talk, and I want to focus a little bit on a term that I heard at S4 this past month in February is cyber-informed engineering, right? Which to me goes along with, if you have a client it's chosen Armis as their OT cybersecurity platform, and you've got projects going on in your manufacturing environments, to be looking ahead of saying, well, we're an Armis shop, and I've got all these new machines and skids coming in over the next year, 2, 3, whatever. What should they be doing in order to ensure that they're improving and increasing their cyber posture within the design build of those new machines?
Well, there is a lot of things that you should be doing. The first and foremost is that you have to make sure that you have that visibility in place. Okay. So the problem that you have is that you're actually adding things into the network, packages and new equipment, new lines, and you lose focus of, what devices you have and you are maintaining. And, not seeing the devices that you have, what is going to happen is that you're going to have risks and vulnerabilities that you're not aware of, and they could actually be introduced into the systems without noticing. Okay. So if you have a continuous monitoring of what devices are actually into the network, and then you start looking at brand, model, firmware versions that they're using, and then match that with the vulnerabilities and the risks. On top of that, then what these devices are tend to communicate, are they configured properly? So that's actually very important. Okay. And one thing that I find as well is that sometimes when you actually bring equipment, depending on what they have in the stores, they might be already old, and meaning that, you have a device, a PLC that, even though you're buying it brand new, you might have an out of date firmware, for instance. And before you actually put it into production, you need to actually check whether or not you can patch it and you can actually get it up to date. Because one of the things that, typically happens when you're in production is that you can't shut down whenever you need to patch or you find vulnerabilities. That's why you have shutdown windows, right? So that you can actually start looking at, what you need to fix. But what people don't understand, that a shutdown window is a project altogether, meaning that you have a project manager that is in charge of all the activities across that shutdown window. So sometimes you can't even actually patch during that shutdown window because they might be using a piece of equipment for testing some changes that they need to make in the control system and the program, and then they need to test it. And then if you want to bring that down, just because even it's in the shutdown window and they won't be able to test, then the project manager is going to tell you, unfortunately, I'm using it and you can't patch it. So that's one of the things. I make sure that when you're bringing things in, they're up to date with the latest the patches. Also understand, what the behaviors from a device perspective, what are they tend to communicate. If there is a misconfiguration, for instance, they try to connect to the internet or try to connect to the vendor website just to grab updates or things like that, like cameras, for instance, are typically what happens. Just make sure that all that is actually taken care of before you start introducing new equipment into your plant.
Yeah,
does that make sense?
Yeah. And again, for the IT leadership out there, kind of sum this up. One, just make sure you're aware of your company's capital plan. Just be aware of it, right? Timing of it and what they're focusing on as far as their capital spend. The other is becoming in tune with their maintenance windows, right? Because that's your opportunity to go in, and they're going to have a whole bunch of other activities going on, which is why they take those maintenance windows. They usually don't take them down just for a patch update. They probably got several activities geared up for that downtime window. Just be aware of those, because that's your opportunity to get in there and do some of this work.
When they get to the plant door where the products have to be implemented, they try to go through the IT door. And that's like going through the side door into a house. It's like, it's not the entrance that you're welcomed in. It's the one where I'm here now. What do I do? And they don't have that path to meeting the plant managers. They don't have that path to knowing the problems, because many of them show up and say, I'm here because IT purchased this, or I'm on a contract to support this, and we're now going to put it into OT. And you see that all the time where it's, we just showed up, somebody paid us money, and we're here to do something. But that something is nebulous.
Right. Well, and they're not demonstrating the value or the benefit, right, to them. I've heard OT professionals, plant floor people say cybersecurity just gets in the way of getting things done, right, because they've witnessed it, they've lived it, right? It's been pain points for them. And I run into IT organizations all the time that have spent little to no time inside their manufacturing facilities, nor are they building relationships with the OEMs or SIs that their manufacturing teams are hiring and or buying their machines, where IT's really engaged or involved in that discussion. So is that something that's warranted? Do you think that will change this dynamic? Do you think that those folks are ever going to take that leap of faith and go, I'm going to have to go spend an exorbitant amount of time in my plants to figure out how those things run and tick.
They will. And I equate it in a microcosm way to restaurants now that are farm to table. And they say, I go out and I meet the farmers. I know where things come from that are going to my end products that I serve to the public. Manufacturing, agriculture, transportation, energy, you name any of the CISA critical infrastructures out there, that has to be the approach. I need to know where these things come from. And they do it on the supply chain side with sourcing and other things where they drive down in detail. But when it comes to security, they're looking at safety, they're looking at uptime, they're looking at nothing has happened before, why should it happen now? And they're also looking and saying, I need my vendors to be here when something happens and to not get in the way and try to help me run my business better because I know my business, they're just here to sell me technology. And that's really the approach. That technology, we've got it in the door.
And do you think there's anything missing from the technology, or we have the tech, it's just not being implemented in a manner that's gaining benefit for the organization?
Well, let's talk about that one word, implemented. You go out every day and of the products that a company has bought for their plant, security focused, help desk improvement for them, monitoring, anything and everything over there, not just security. How many of those have truly been implemented properly? How many of them are shelfware?
I find a lot of shelfware when we go out there, right? They're tools that the client bought, somebody sold them, and nobody really taught them how to use it or how to apply it to their specific use cases, right? Even across their plants, right? Taking it into one plant, you're not necessarily going to go through the same scenario that you might at another plant. Or because there may not be, you might have one plant that's all Rockwell and a mix of other things, and you go to another plant that's primarily Siemens and a mix of other things, and those plants might make the same stuff, but they do it differently, right?
And that's exactly it. And I've been there, and this is the have and have not world where when I was over a major manufacturing company for agricultural equipment, off-road and on-road or off-highway, on-highway, the big plant that produced the end product that would sell for millions of dollars, they were flush with money with what they wanted to do. The little plant that was spinning out the widgets that went into that big product, it was patch the parking lot, fix a hole in the roof, and deal with OSHA if I don't do that. Or it's spend the money on cybersecurity, which who's going to come at my door and say you're going to be fined and we're going to be the boogeyman? Nobody really at this juncture. So you have to treat the entire thing properly. And in IT, you have a buying group that buys for an organization. One department doesn't say, well, I'm going to go with this AV software because I like it. IT comes in and says, here is the standard. And in OT, as you said, one plant's Rockwell, one plant's Yokogawa. One plant is basically Siemens or any other vendor out there. And granted, they are for different things on the production line, but when it comes down to certain areas, you have to have commonality.
Yeah. To me, I look at cybersecurity tools because they're labeled as such, right? And cybersecurity is kind of a boiling ocean kind of term. But then I also look at that process integrity because I come from a manufacturing background, and we all know safety is job number one, but number two is reducing unplanned, unscheduled downtime, right? Because that's very costly. And so if these tools could help improve your efficiencies within your manufacturing environment, even if it can move it a few percentage points or several percentage points, that's big money. And so when you're talking about cost, because the budget's cut, constraints. If you're losing millions of dollars on your plant floor annually due to unplanned, unscheduled downtime, where this tool might save you $1 million or $2+ million a year, is that worth pursuing? Versus fighting through buying a tool, either one, because we see IT do this a lot just to check a box, but then they never share it with the OT teams who really are the recipients of that data that comes from that platform. Right. And at the same time, can you get the OT guys to go, I need this, and these are the reasons why, right? I mean, that's one of the challenges that I see in my business is teaching the client-facing engineering teams on leveraging these tools to help with just project execution and startup and commissioning, right? Because they can't see, again, back to the underwater camera piece, they don't know what's going on underneath the surface.
There is a term that is out in the IT world that I've used called left of boom. Left of boom means if you're looking through a MITRE ATT&CK framework or you're going through an XDR, EDR type tool, you're building analytical data to determine if something is bad or good, and you're trying to stop it before it happens. If we take the security tools and say, we're doing more than security here, we're giving you visibility into your environment, and we're now pulling back data that is cyber physical. So that means giant industrial turbines or things like that, natural gas equipment. For example, I've dealt with an entity that said, if we have to have a flare burn off of methane, natural type gas products out there to get out of the landfill, if something's going on, I need to know about it. Well, you can't know about it if it's in the middle of nowhere with no connectivity. You now give it connectivity, you can have a left of boom moment where you can say, I know pressure's building up, I know heat's building up, I know somebody is there from a door sensor. Now I can see what they're doing and now I can prevent it. That's left of boom thinking. It doesn't matter if the security component is there because most of the people in the plants, as you said, it's safety first. It's get me in with any product the vendor has basically dropped in as part of their package, and it's keeping uptime. So that is a left of boom moment is, can you get analytical data, situational awareness outside of the facility to give you that advantage?
Yeah. So who do you see as being the true leaders in this discussion, per se? I mean, as you mentioned, there's consultants, right? You got the technology vendors that are out there. I don't think the government is driving this narrative to that extent. For the majority of manufacturers out there, our critical infrastructure organizations, who's really got their finger on the pulse to this? I mean, if you're a CEO or a CFO, plant manager, who would you recommend that they need to go talk to get better at this, to get smarter at this?
Yep. So the plant manager or the operational lead at a facility is the person that runs things. And you've met a bunch of these people. We know a bunch of them in common. And when you go and see them at a show, you can tell they're the guy that, has their pulse on how the facility operates. The problem is that their pulse is generally on the uptime production type things in the plant. It's not on the how do I make it more secure because I'm fearful of something going wrong. And then you trickle down to the vendor that comes in, puts in an entire production line, an entire packaging or bottling process. And the plant manager and the company go, you own that, you're responsible for it. And it's really at that point contractually driven that if you have downtime, there's huge penalties. Look at the automotive industry, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars a minute or hour for when you're down.
It's like $22,000 a minute, at least several years ago. That was the metric in automotive. Right.
Yeah.
And
now I hear people out there where it's 50, 60,000 for critical things, but a lot of people focus on the manufacturing side. If you look at other areas that's in there, like the energy, like maritime, like even financial is part of the CISO critical sectors. If you look at the New York Stock Exchange, now those were built, those computers and everything are right there on the floor. They're dedicated links because those transactions have to be in a timed capacity. And so all of these industries know what good looks like from a process communication, process flow, and how to make it work at maximum efficiency. What they fail at then is, okay, now how do we wrap security around this? Because they view security as it's going to slow things down. It's going to cause delays. It's going to cause outages. And we've seen those, sadly. And so really now it's not selling you're going to be more secure. You're really selling to the plant manager, we promise we're not going to break anything.
But to me, that gets to the point of where you have to have, just like your operations team, your engineering team, your production teams, who know how to run that equipment pretty optimally, right? Generally speaking, they do.
Yep.
But again, they don't know what's going on from the data streams underneath within that machine center.
Thanks for tuning in to the Industrial Cybersecurity Insider. To stay up to date with our latest episodes, be sure to click the follow or subscribe button now. And if you found this podcast helpful or have a topic you'd like us to discuss, please leave us a review or let us know. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.